Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. Welcome back to Ranking Stephen King Decades. This is episode 3, and this is part 2 of my rankings for Stephen King's 1980s releases. And of course, I'll link down below part 1 of my 1980s Stephen King releases, which are the books that I would rank 19 through 10. Those are what I would consider my least favorite Stephen King books from the 1980s, although there are some really good ones. So just because they're in that video does not mean I hate them. And then of course, this is part 2, where I will be talking about my favorite books from the 1980s. And all of these are bangers. I love all of these. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Coming in at number 9 on the list, we have a book that I just recently read for my Richard Bachman read-along with Josephina, and we have differing opinions on this book, but anyway, let's just jump right into it. That'll be Thinner by Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King. I've read this book twice now, and both times I've always considered this one of my favorite Richard Bachman books. Not my absolute favorite, which you'll see later on in this video. But yes, I love this book. I love the pacing. I don't necessarily love the characters, but I love the directions that King puts them in and the situations that King puts them in. I think it's just really fun. Like, it's just a really fun and fast-paced, for me, Richard Bachman book. And it's definitely got that, like, gritty, nihilistic edge to it. But at the same time, it is still fun to read just because of the weirdness of it all and just the humor of the dark humor. And you guys know how much I love dark humor. So this book really does it for me. But like I said, I don't love the characters, which is why I wouldn't go ahead and say it's a 5-star read. But the characters are good enough to get me invested in the story and to propel me through the story. And I just really like it. I've loved it both times I've read it, and it's definitely a book. It's a book. It's definitely a Richard Bachman book that I could see myself rereading over and over again. Whereas some of the other ones, like The Long Walk, even though that one's really good, I don't see myself rereading those as often as this one. I love this book. And yeah, it's number 9 on the list, Thinner. And for number 8 on my rankings, one of Stephen King's most underrated books. Not a lot of people talk about this book, and even a lot of constant readers haven't. They've probably heard of it, but they probably haven't read it. But for me, it's always been one of my favorites, so I'm gonna have to go with The Dark Half for number 8. Speaking of Richard Bachman, this book is kind of a culmination of Stephen King's Richard Bachman experience, because as you know, he wrote under the name Richard Bachman, and for a while, people didn't make the connection that it was actually Stephen King writing it. But by the time he was writing Thinner, the cat was out of the bag and people already knew about it. So what did he do? He went ahead and wrote a book about an author's pseudonym coming to life and killing people. And it's awesome. This book is definitely one of Stephen King's best paced books. I love the characters. It's got a lot of gruesome scenes. And on top of that, it has a really cool ending, which Stephen King sometimes doesn't nail the endings, but sometimes he does. And this is definitely one of those times. I love this book. I really want to reread it soon, so this would be a good time for me to do a shameless plug for my Patreon. All of my patrons, no matter what tier they are, they get to vote for which Stephen King book they'd like me to read and review for the channel every month. And the last few times have been Desperation and Carrie, which I'm doing this month, which I've already read it, and I will be doing a review for that sometime this month. So far for the vote in July, we have votes for Rage, Needful Things, Dolores Claiborne, Mr. Mercedes, and Firestarter. So if any of those books you'd like to vote for, or conversely, if you see any books in this video that you want to vote for, I'll leave a link down below for my Patreon. And if you'd like to, you can come support me financially. And no matter what tier you are, you get to vote. The only thing is, like, if you're tier 1, you get 1 vote, and then the higher up you move, the more votes you get. So if you'd like to, you certainly don't have to, but if you'd like to, go check that out, and you'd be able to vote for which Stephen King book you'd like me to read every month. And of course, I'm always hoping someone chooses this book, because I want a good excuse to go back and reread this book. Because lately I've been reading a lot of Stephen King, if you haven't noticed, with Dark Tower, Richard Bachman book, and then Patreon pick every month. So it's hard for me to fit in like a bunch of Stephen King when I've got a lot of other stuff to read. So if anyone wants to pick this book, do it. But anyway, that's number 8, The Dark Half. I really love this book. And for number 7 on my ranking list, I'm going to have to go with Cujo, which I don't think this is necessarily a lot of people's favorite Stephen King book, or even a book that they would put in their top 10. But certainly for me, I would at least put it in my top 20. It's really good, even though it does have sort of a pet peeve of mine, no pun intended. It doesn't have chapters. Like, it's basically just 300 pages. Starts off, once upon a time, in a land far away, there was a crazy-ass dog. It's basically 300 pages, and there's no chapters. There are chapter breaks, but it does feel weird. For me, I usually don't enjoy reading books without chapters. But for this one, the book just kind of flies by for me, and all of the characters are interesting enough to keep me engaged. And yeah, this is definitely a book that, I watched the movie growing up, so I went into it thinking that the ending was going to be one way, but the ending was way worse in like just gut-wrenching, not worse in bad. But yeah, it had a really gut-wrenching ending, and I wasn't exactly prepared for it, because I was like, oh yeah, the movie, I've seen the movie a bunch of times. But then you get to the ending of this, you're just like, oh, Stephen King went there. And yeah. But yeah, it's a really good book. I'm sure you guys know about Cujo, the rabid dog, and the mother and the son getting locked in a car in the middle of the summer. And I love Stephen King books that are like more on the realistic side of horror, where some things like It, like Pennywise, or like Aliens from like Dreamcatcher or Tommyknocker, they're not exactly scary to me because I know those things aren't real. But Cujo, man, like, this could happen, and that freaks me out. Like, what would you do if you were locked in a car with your baby boy, no way to get out, no AC, no food or water, and you got Cujo lurking in the background? Shit. So yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites, and for my 1980s ranking, I'm gonna have to go with number 7. And for number 6 on my list, I am currently rereading this book as we speak. Well, not literally as we speak, but I am currently rereading the book, and that would be The Eyes of the Dragon. This is one of the first Stephen King books I read. I think the first one was The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, which I read in middle school, like in 6th grade, and I wasn't a huge fan of it. But I read this one in like 8th grade, and I liked it. I didn't love it though. When I was watching Stephen King as a kid, I always expected it to be horror. And then I picked this up and I was like, oh yeah, this is more of a fantasy book. But I think I've reread it as an adult before, and now I'm rereading it again. It's still one of my favorite Stephen King books. I would definitely put it in my top 20. It's just, I don't know how to describe it. It's not written like a typical Stephen King book. Like, it's written more on the young adult side, and it's written, like, it's less than 400 pages, but it's got like 140 chapters. Usually I don't like books like that where the chapters are super short, but for whatever reason, it works in this book. Also, I'm just enjoying all of the little Dark Tower Easter eggs. Like, Randall Flagg is like the main villain in here. And then there's an allusion to a character in Wizard and Glass, which is very fun. And then just the weirdness of having the king of this tale be Roland. Like, not Roland from The Gunslinger, but his name is just Roland. Like, why did he decide to do that? I don't know, but that's kind of funny. But either way, like, The Eyes of the Dragon, just a really good, just not epic fantasy, but high fantasy. I really like it. I'm really enjoying the audiobook, which the other 2 times that I've read this, I've done physically, but the audio narrator is superb. I really enjoy him, so yeah, Eyes of the Dragon's still one of my favorites. Please let me know if you guys have read it and if you like it as much as I do. But anyway, that's number 6 on the list. And now we've reached my top 5 books, Stephen King books for the 1980s. And it's pretty crazy because I'm looking at my list here and I'm fairly sure that all of these books would make my top 10 list, my top 10 Stephen King list, which is pretty crazy because that's half of the top 10 is from the 80s. Definitely the top 3, maybe, you know what, fuck it. All of them are top 10. I love all of these books. Anyway, number 5, I'm gonna have to go with Firestarter. When I was originally doing my overall Stephen King ranking for all of his books, I was very pleasantly surprised by how high this book was, just because the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't really find any faults with this book. I loved pretty much everything about this book. The characters were great. I love the premise. I love the pacing, and definitely one of Stephen King's best endings of all time. I just absolutely love this book, and I implore you, if you are a constant reader and you have not read this book, go check it out. You will not be disappointed, and if you are, then you. I'm just kidding. Oh my god. But yes, definitely one of my favorite Stephen King books, and even the 1980s adaptation is fairly good. I'm still hesitant on checking out the new movie. I'm actually really tired of like people remaking King movies that have already been made. Like, I want them to make Stephen King movies that have never been made. Like, make The Long Walk, make Revival, make Doohickey. Don't remake movies that have already been made. What are you doing, Hollywood? All right, rant aside, I really enjoy Firestarter. Like I said, one of my favorites. And just, it's one of the best just overall King books from start to finish. Like, I can't find any faults with this book. I love it. So I'm going to stop my gushing and say that that's number 5 on the list, Firestarter. All right, and for number 4, very unpopular opinion. People usually do not like this book. I'm in the complete minority. I love this book. I know a couple other people that I've met on YouTube and Discord who say that they love this book, but generally people don't like this book, which I don't particularly understand, but whatever. Anyway, number 4 is Roadwork by Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King. And this is by far my favorite Richard Bachman book. I love this book. And the first time I read this, I kind of pushed it off. Like when I was reading all of Stephen King's books, I pushed it off because it was always near the bottom of people's lists. And I'm just like, ugh, do I really want to, force myself to read this really bad book? Kind of like how Cell and just a lot of like from Buick 8 and just a lot of Dreamcatcher, Tommyknockers, just a lot of bad books are on people's like bottom of the list. Like, this book was always near the bottom, and I was just like, let's just wait. And then I finally picked it up. I was like, all right, let's just get it out of the way. And then I absolutely loved it, and I was completely floored. I just thought this book was amazing. I love the character of Barton Dawes, And it's basically just a character study, which I guess I can kind of understand why people don't like it, just because it's very, very different from a lot of King books. There's no supernatural elements. There's no real horror in this book. It's just a character study and a guy kind of slowly losing his mind and just making decisions that he shouldn't be making and just getting into the psychology of Barton Dawes. It was really fun. But yeah, a lot of people don't like it. I love it. That's fine. I give this book 5 stars. Absolutely love it. And for me, it's my 4th favorite in the 1980s. And for number 3, this is my very favorite Dark Tower book of all time. I've read this book 3 times, I think, and I've loved it every single time I've read it. And that would, of course, be The Drawing of the Three, book 2 in the Dark Tower series. Still my favorite Dark Tower book, even though there are a lot of other great Dark Tower books. This one is just, it's got so many elements that I love. And a trend that I'm noticing with all of these Stephen King books in my top 9 for the 1980s, they're all very well paced, and that's a big thing for me with Stephen King, because I typically don't love his long, sloggy books that just take forever to get through, and a lot of it feels unnecessary. This is by far one of Stephen King's best paced books, if not his best. This book is just go, go, go nonstop, and I love it for that. And on top of that, it's also the character introduction of Eddie Dean, probably my favorite Dark Tower character, and just one of my favorite Stephen King characters overall. I love Eddie Dean, and I love his interactions with Roland. I've said in the past, like, it's sort of a fish out of water tale, where just Roland's interactions with Eddie Dean, like, they just come from two completely different worlds, and just them interacting with each other, and the phrases that they use, and their confusion, and just Roland walking around in the place that he is just hilarious. I love the book for that. So yeah, The Drawing of the Three, Dark Tower Book 2, has always been my favorite Dark Tower book, and just overall one of my favorite Stephen King books. And for the 1980s, it is number 3 on my list. And for number 2 on my list, we're gonna have to go with my favorite novella collection from Stephen King, and just overall my favorite collection from Stephen King. Novellas, short stories, whatever. And that would be Different Seasons. And of course, I love all 4 novellas in this collection, including Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption, clearly a classic, and then, obviously one of the best movie adaptations of all time. You got Apt Pupil, which I love. It's my 2nd favorite in this collection. Just so dark. He probably could have lengthened it a bit and made it like a Richard Bachman novel. That would have been really cool. But as it stands, one of my favorite Stephen King novellas. And then, of course, you've got The Body, which got turned into Stand By Me. Really good, although probably my least favorite, which people would probably object to. But either way, it's still 5 stars. Like, I love it. And then, of course, you have The Breathing Method, which is my all-time favorite Stephen King novella. So good. The ending, I will never forget the ending. Just one of the best endings ever. So yeah, Different Seasons is my 2nd favorite from the 1980s, and probably in my overall ranking, it would be number 3. And then for number 1 on my list, probably my 2nd favorite Stephen King book of all time, and that would be that hurt. My number 1 spot for the 1980s has to, of course, go to Misery. I love this book. I've read it twice now. I read it the first time physically, and then the second time on audio. Both times were very good, very thrilling, and honestly, this is probably the scariest book I've read. I'm not usually affected by books. I don't really get scared too easily, but probably if I had to choose one, this would be the scariest. And like I said with Cujo, for me, when Stephen King writes realistic horror, that's way more terrifying than any kind of paranormal thing or just any kind of thing that's not real doesn't really scare me. But this one, I feel like, even though it is a little far-fetched, like, it could happen. Like, it is realistic in that sense. And also, just the things that happen to Paul Sheldon are very terrifying and very realistic. And for that reason, like, it's always been one of my favorites. There is one book that I like better than this, and that would be The Dead Zone, which, of course, if you watched my 1970s episode, that was my favorite overall. And if you haven't watched it, sorry I just spoiled you, but you can go watch it down below. But yes, definitely for the 1980s, yeah, that's my favorite. So yeah, Misery comes in at the #1 spot. And like I said, all of these books that I mentioned in this video, I absolutely love. All of them are bangers. Just so many great books. And I know Roadwork, that's probably the most unpopular opinion in this video. But I think for the most part, even though I don't have It and Pet Sematary in here or The Gunslinger, you gotta still admit that most of these books are very good. But I don't know, some people, I mean, that's the fun of all of this, right? Like, none of this matters. It's all subjective. It's all my opinion. Like, it's all for fun. And you could definitely disagree with me in the comments below. And I urge you to put down in the comments how you would rank the 1980s. Even if you haven't read all of them, just like, what are your favorite books that Stephen King wrote in the 1980s? I'd love to have a chat with you down in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and the Book Astronomer Discord. And if you'd like to further support me and have a chance to vote on the Patreon TBR wheel spin, go check out my Patreon page and see what that's all about. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching and have a terrific day. And also, before I forget, I think next week I'm going to be doing my Carrie book review, like I said, for my Patreons. And after that, I think I'm going to be ranking all of the Stephen King books from the 1990s. So be on the lookout for that. But yeah, thank you guys so much and have a terrific day.